Hey there, aspiring self-storage investors. Coach Roel here. Before I settled on what I wanted to talk about in this video, I initially wanted to address a pretty common question surrounding self-storage investing, and that is self-storage investing recession-proof? Recession-proof, I thought? Okay, the short answer to that one is a resounding no, which would have made this video a very short one indeed. In fact, I can't think of anything really that can be definitively considered as recession-proof. But I can think of four very strong reasons why self-storage investing is recession-resistant. And that, my friends, is what I wanted to share with you in this video. Now, in the investing world, there's a kind of a fancy term called counter-cyclical. And in the investing world, counter-cyclical describes any industry or stock or business that outperforms or even rises during economic downturns or recessions, making them good diversifiers to have in your portfolio. For example, there's the sin stocks or industries of cigarettes, alcohol, and gambling. They're called sin, S-I-N, because they're all bad for you. Companies in these industries are counter-cyclical because they tend to outperform or even rise during economic downturns. Because, let's face it, during hard times, on average, people tend to smoke and drink more and do things like buy lottery tickets and go to casinos to either serve as stress relievers or try to make back some of their money they've lost, or all of the above. When looked at as a real estate niche and a business niche, self-storage tends to fare better than other businesses and real estate sectors during a downturn, and for a few reasons. In self-storage investing, we kind of sometimes consider ourselves to be in the trauma and transition, also known as life events industry. And in this business, think of things like marriage or divorce or renovating or relocating. These are all life events that happen all the time, fairly independently of how the economy is doing at that time. And oftentimes, these life events require temporary storage of people's stuff. Of course, while traumatic and transitional life events certainly do occur at any and all points during an economic cycle, one could argue that there are more divorces and less renovating during tough economic times, which might bring a slowdown to self-storage industry demand. But that brings us to my next point, that storage needs actually increase during a recession. One of the unfortunate realities of a recession is that the movement of people and businesses into, let's say, less spacious accommodations or facilities arises. And as wages stop growing or decrease or disappear altogether, and the employment picture gets grimmer, homeowners and renters tend to downgrade the size of their living space in their homes. But they still need a place to store all their stuff. Self-storage facilities benefit from this demand and can sometimes even see increased rental rates during a downturn. Self-storage facilities actually have less reliance on individual tenants as well. Now think about this. Consider a 100-unit multifamily apartment building. Most would consider that to be a big deal, or a large building, or at least like the higher end of medium-sized at least. A 100-unit multifamily building would definitely not be considered small. And what about a 100-unit commercial office or retail building? Again, in that sector, a 100-unit office or retail building is definitely considered large, if not at least bordering on large. But what about a 100-unit self-storage facility? 100 units in the self-storage niche is considered kind of medium-sized. Maybe not considered large for sure, but definitely not small. And here's why that's a good thing for investors and owners. Self-storage facilities tend to generate their income from a larger pool of tenants compared with all but the largest commercial real estate investments in multifamily, retail, etc. Heavy reliance on a single or limited pool of tenants exposes the investor to risk should those few or fewer tenants default during a recession. Self-storage facilities tend to have more tenants, as you can imagine, with less of a financial contribution to the bottom line per tenant. It's actually a good thing because this provides a diversification effect that protects self-storage investors from dramatic drops in tenancies at their properties. Here's an extremely unfair comparison, imagine, if you will. If you have a single-family rental property, you'll either have 100% occupancy or 0% occupancy, and never anything in between. If you have a small 50-unit storage facility, let's say, and one tenant ends their lease, that only affects your occupancy by 2%. Lower maintenance and operations costs are also pretty good. When compared to other forms of commercial real estate, self-storage facilities have significantly lower operations and maintenance costs. For example, a multifamily building may require leasing staff, a property manager, on-site maintenance, and a whole host of other regular costs associated with running the property. Lowered operating costs allow self-storage owners to keep profit margins pretty reasonably high, that is, while reducing the capital expenditures, the repairs, maintenance necessary to keep the business running. This can be incredibly helpful during recessions when lending standards are tighter and capital is harder to access. Sounds like these days, right? But what about the argument that counter-cyclical stocks and businesses will also tend to underperform during periods of economic expansion when more traditionally cyclical stocks and businesses will do well? The question is, do self-storage facilities underperform during economic good times? Well, the answer to that one is a resounding no. And here's my favorite big picture argument for that. Think about this. For most mature economies, and definitely in the case of the United States, we are becoming more and more materialistic. The mature economies of the world are increasingly nations of, let's say, consumers and hoarders, to put it nicely, and none more so than the United States of America. In fact, when you look at the way GDP is calculated, which is the way each nation is basically measured in terms of productivity by their gross domestic product calculation, a full 70% of the US's GDP is attributed to consumer spending. It's kind of weird when you think of it that way. Nearly 3/4 of the US's entire economic output as a nation is not that their people produce stuff, but that they consume stuff, meaning they buy stuff, meaning they spend on buying goods and services. And in a nation that buys so much stuff that they literally don't know where to put it all, wouldn't it be great to be in a business that rents out additional storage space to such people? So are self-storage facilities recession-proof? No. Are they recession-resistant or counter-cyclical? Yes, and you know now why. Because trauma and transition, also known as life events, happen in both economic good times and bad, because storage needs increase during a recession, because self-storage facilities draw from a larger pool of tenants compared to all but the largest commercial real estate facilities, and because self-storage facilities tend to have lower maintenance and operating costs. And when the economy eventually transitions from recession to recovery mode and people go back to buying stuff en masse, you can bet for sure that we'll be there to help them store their stuff. Once again, I'm Coach Roel, and I hope to see you again soon in another video on self-storage investing in the very near future.